we are back on the air at the same time that we are back on Facebook. So sometimes you're like, hey, how come I just heard him in the middle of a sentence? Because the conversation continues when we're live on Facebook, even during our commercial breaks. And we've been getting to some of your questions. We've had a couple questions from Silver Fox and Jonathan Namath, both asking about, you hear a lot of talk when a storm is close about what's the good side, the bad side, the drier side, the east versus west, those sorts of things.
Well, in this situation where we're going to have a storm moving from south to north, the right side or the east side is going to be the worst side to be on, if you will. So take this for instance, if you're, look at this landfall point, maybe a little bit westward here, the core would be right on top of Miami-Dade County, but we're looking at the potential for surge there and high water from Miami all the way up towards the east coast.
Okay.
So now we're counting back to being live on air. Yes. And welcome back to our special Facebook Live coverage and live on air here on Fox 4. And Amy and I are arguing about when we should stop talking, right? Because
well, no, we don't ever want to stop talking.
It's a continuous conversation on Facebook Live, but then sometimes in the middle of our responses or questions, or when we're talking to you, we're like, hold on a second. We get back live on TV as well as being on Facebook.
Right, which is what just happened at this moment. So we're happy to be back here live on air with you. We're on Facebook as well, answering your questions. So please post on Facebook right now. Silver Fox was asking questions about the side of the storm. Which side is better? What does each side look like? And that's what Derek was talking about. So if you want to finish your thought on that.
Yeah, so all I was saying is that, if you're familiar with these tropical storms, if you're not familiar with them, typically the way the storm is moving, the right side is the rough side. That's the side based on the way it's moving. So in this situation with Irma coming towards the South Florida coast here by Sunday, whatever side is the right side from the eye is the side that's going to get the surge, at least the biggest surge, and also, of course, the threat for tornadoes, especially in the northeast quadrant. So that's what, that's one of those things that we stress all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that the left side is the safe side. There's no safe side in any hurricane or any tropical storm at all. You're still going to get heavy rainfall on the left side, but if we were looking at that situation there with Hurricane Irma making landfall right around the Miami area, for us here in Southwest Florida, we would be on that left side. So that means an offshore wind for a period. Now, when it starts lifting northward up towards the Space Coast, our winds are going to come out of the west, so we're going to get onshore winds. So we may get some water rises, Collier, Lee County, all the way up through Charlotte County and Sarasota County. But in this case, with it coming onshore, we're going to have a northeast to, I'd say, east to northeast wind. And in this case, you're going to start getting water getting pushed away. So you're not going to get the water piling up due to the onshore winds until the storm starts lifting far enough north where you get that west wind. The winds will come back out of the other direction when the storm starts moving northward.
So obviously we want to focus on Irma because that's what we're, we're talking about right now. But so many people, including Chad Upchurch, are asking about Katia because that has become a hurricane.
Yes.
They're worried about, is that coming our way too?
We've got two new ones, So after Harvey, it seems like a lot of folks have shell shock, and that's that's understandable, especially after this one too. But Katia, not going to be an issue. It's a hurricane now. It's going to be moving into Mexico. It's going to stay down to the southern Bay of Campeche, so we're not expecting it to move up to Texas and give them more rain. And of course, we've got Jose following on the heels. Now, this is going to make a really close pass. Jose is going to make a really close pass to some of these same areas, the northern Leeward Islands that were affected by Irma earlier today. So they're going to get another close scare there, but I do not think that Jose is going to directly affect those islands. But that's the way things look right now. Jose and Katia not going to be factors for our weather or anyone in the United States.
Justin Thomas is asking, should I bother with my storm shutters at this point?
I've been debating that myself. It's what, and at this point, I can't really tell you what to do. All I can do is just tell you to be prepared. One way or another, you're going to have to make that call on your own. But because this track could easily change, it could easily change. The turn could turn. The turn could happen a little bit later, and that would put more of us in the threat for hurricane force winds.
All right. So obviously, a lot of people have family and friends up in the Carolinas. George and Mike are asking here, what about the Carolinas? Because this has kind of shifted to the east. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one thing that I can say is that I've noticed that several of the models have honed in on the Charleston area. Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, the Georgia coast. I can't remember the last time they actually had a direct hit from a hurricane. They're going to have issues from St. Simon's Island, Jekyll Island, Jacksonville, all the way up to Savannah and Charleston. Right now, there's a projected landfall, a second landfall of Irma as a strong hurricane as it gets to the South Carolina coast there. So they could be dealing with the first big hurricane they've had since Hugo in 1989.
Danielle Heflin is asking, with the projected path as it is now, how long would Southwest Florida feel the effects?
Well, considering the wind field's large, when I say wind field, I'm talking about how far the winds spread out from the center. The tropical storm force winds go out 175 miles. So if you got a storm that's, let's say, moving at about 10, 15 miles an hour, and you've got to go through several hours of tropical storm force winds, and we're looking at, upwards of 24 hours of tropical storm winds. Now, that's sustained winds, in the 30 to 40 mile an hour range, could easily get some gusts, particularly closer to the center of the storm in those places I mentioned earlier. Glades, Hendry County, Inland Collier County, where you could get some gusts up close to hurricane force. So we're talking maybe about a day to a day and a half of really gusty winds.
So we are going to take a quick break here on TV, but we are going to stay with you live on Facebook. So please, if you have questions, join us on Facebook Live right now and keep posting. We'll be right back on Fox 4 News and Facebook Live, friends. Stick with us. All right, so we are still here. Another question, Derek, that Carrie was asking, and I can kind of chime in on this as well. She said, if I'm told to evacuate, what would I need to re-enter the area? I remember, I do think that it's kind of a two-tier answer because it depends how bad things are, damage-wise. I remember after Charlie, people who were trying to get back onto Fort Myers Beach, you had to have a license and prove that you were a resident on the area. So it's not a bad idea, as we've been saying. If you are going to evacuate, bring important documents and paperwork with you. But it really would depend on the amount of damage. If you evacuate and there's not much damage to your area,
I imagine you can come back. Probably the authorities probably will be able to let you know exactly when you need to come back, especially in a situation where you have a significant disaster like an Andrew or a Charlie, where they need to keep people out so that they can do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Jimmy and Shannon Humphrey are asking, is it possible the models are seeing a wobble and not a trend?
Now, I think they're seeing a trend, but just based on the upper air features, and wobbles are kind of more of a short-term, what we call a mesoscale type feature, a microscale feature, where they're kind of on a smaller scale, if you will. And those actually are a little bit on the difficult side to forecast. But this trend that we're seeing is based on bigger features that cover a larger area. So we're talking hundreds of miles as opposed to just a few tens of miles.
So two things. Tiffany Cox wanted everyone to know she found gas at Costco in Fort Myers, which a family friend of mine posted that on Facebook. No line, no wait. Costco at Cypress and 41 had gas.
Nice.
And then another question that I just saw, where can I get gas in North Fort Myers? Desiree Rosario was asking. The governor said today, Gas Buddy, it's an app you can get on your phone, is the best way. I've heard from several people on social media telling me they downloaded it. Someone I went to high school with said she downloaded it, Samantha, and she said it seemed pretty accurate. It tells you if they have gas, if they're out, how much gas they have. So that might be a good resource if you are wondering, hey, I want to get out of Dodge. I only have, half a gallon or a half a tank, I mean, and that way you can kind of see if you can get out of the area.
We have 30 seconds, but this is a question that we're getting a lot. So maybe I can just read the question the next 25 seconds, 15 seconds.
Got to get it out, Patrick.
Yes.
No, well, then we should just share it on air.
So we're going back into
from
programming.
A lot of you who are saying, I know.
No, I'm asking Joel.
Oh, yes, that's correct. Absolutely. Welcome back to our special Facebook Live coverage, and of course live on the air on Fox 4. And Family Feud's coming up, so don't be. I don't think we're gonna get too many complaints tonight because we're getting, I think, our best batch of questions. You can tell people are focusing and paying closer attention because the questions are good. Anna Wallace asking on Facebook, the northward turn, which we've heard about from you all week. What's the weather feature that will cause that to happen? And should we just start there because she has a two-parter? Okay,
yeah.
good.
Well, actually, what it is, it's what we call a shortwave trough, and it's really kind of a fancy term, but I want to show this to you. And this right here, see those little swirls in the atmosphere? We use water vapor imagery, and whenever you see meteorologists use this, we like to know where these little spins are in the atmosphere. They're called little areas of vorticity. Vorticity is just a fancy word for spin, and basically what it does is it's part of the reason why we get rain and the storm systems that we have. And these are little small swirls in the atmosphere because the atmosphere is a fluid. It's like if you were to fill a bathtub full of water and you run your hand through it, you see the little eddies that form as a result of that. Same thing happens in the atmosphere. Well, this feature right here is what's going to be dropping down, and actually it's going to help turn this system towards the north, and I will show you what we're looking at, and it'll just kind of give you an idea. And don't get freaked out by these little blobs here. These little blobs are those little areas of vorticity or spin I was talking about, and I want to show you what I'm talking about. That little blob over Mississippi and Alabama, with the European model right there. That is what I just showed you that's up in Canada and the Northern Plains now. That's going to drop down. So it's funny how all these pieces have to come together to determine where this thing is going to go. If this feature were not there, we'd be looking at this thing potentially getting into the Gulf.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if this feature was not there, this is the primary reason why the system's going to turn north by Sunday, because of that. Because what it's going to do is drop down the big area of high pressure that's helping steer it now across westward. That feature is actually going to help weaken that high pressure and allow the storm to move northward. It's kind of like leaning up against the door and somebody just opens it and you just fall right through it. That's what the hurricane likes to do. It waits for the path of least resistance to go right through it. That's what this thing's going to do, just kind of bust the door open and burst the door open.
We got
and let the hurricane go through.
But listen, the second part of her question is kind of what you just referred to. She goes, what would have to happen for the northern turn to happen later, and then it might be headed more toward us?
Well, what would have to happen is one, Irma would have to slow down to allow the feature to get down and perhaps move out, and then allow the high pressure to build back in over it, or the feature to not be there at all, or come in a little bit later. So it's all about timing. And that's one of the things that's been making this forecast so difficult, is the fact that we're trying to find features that are several thousand miles away and figure out exactly the timing of when Irma is going to meet up with it and eventually turn it or allow it. So, you know, I know a lot of people have been frustrated, like, what are you guys going to know when this thing's going? It's very complicated. You just go and Google some of the equations that we have to study for meteorology. It's a very complex science, and it's just, not everything is clear cut all the time. And part of that is as a result of these things. And of course, that's why we have big supercomputers to help solve those equations and figure this stuff out so we can visually see it.
Sure.
And the non-meteorologists among us really just have to remember Hurricane Andrew, they were expecting middle of Miami, went south at the last minute. And Hurricane Charlie, there were people in Southwest Florida while it was hitting in Charlotte County going, but it's supposed to be in Tampa. It's like, no, it doesn't matter what you think is going to happen. What matters is what's happening, and hurricanes have the last word.
That's absolutely true. So that's one of the things. Charlie was a great example of that, you know, where you can get those turns at the last minute, so you just have to be ready.
Absolutely. Be prepared. Madeline Burgess asking, I see everything about Florida, so does that mean it will hit Florida and just stop? Are any other states in trouble? If so, how far do you predict this will travel?
I know a lot of the focus has been on Florida, and probably because we're here.
Yes,
this is where we live. But also, this thing's going to go up the I-95 corridor. So let me show you what the latest forecast track is. And this goes out. This is the European model, for example. And right here we have the storm approaching from the south. You see there moving. At least this is the latest run of the European model. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen this way, but it's going to go up, and it's projected based on its movement to go over Cape Canaveral and then eventually head northward towards the Georgia coast, which they have. I can't remember the last time they actually had a hurricane threat of this magnitude up that way. So Savannah, possibly even Charleston. So South Carolina, North Carolina even needs to watch this one too, just in case for last term. But right now it looks like the potential for the Georgia coast and up towards South Carolina low country, getting down around the Charleston area where they could have some problems with this one later on up the road, probably on Tuesday or so.
We're going to take a quick break on air, but we will be staying live on Facebook Live, so stick with us for that. We are going to continue to answer your questions. We'll be back on air in just a couple of minutes. And for those of you still on Facebook Live, sorry for that. We just had to go toss to a quick break. Ashley Ayler, sorry about that, is asking, what's the likeliness of it losing strength soon after landfall?
Well, one of the things about hurricanes that move across Florida is that a lot of them that I've witnessed, Andrew being one of them, they don't weaken that much.
Right.
Especially
well,
where
you explained well to me the other night because the Everglades are so full of water, and you know southern Florida has so much water.
Yeah, well, you have the Everglades out there, and it's an effect that we call the brown ocean effect, where sometimes you can actually get storms that will maintain their intensity over land. You know, there's plenty of water out over the Everglades and it's warm, so anytime it can be over any warm water source, even if it gets out over Lake Okeechobee, that's another source where it can draw energy from that. Even if part of the storm remains over the Gulf or fingers of it remain over the Atlantic, which would be the Gulf Stream, it could still tap into that moisture and maintain itself. That's why Harvey, for a long time, stayed as strong as it was, because half of it was hanging offshore, so it was still taking advantage of some of those warm Gulf waters. Francis was one that took forever to get across the state. It maintained its hurricane strength for quite some time. And, of course, Andrew made landfall as a Category 5, went all the way across the Everglades, and then came out on the other side pretty much unscathed. It didn't weaken that much. So the storms don't tend to weaken quickly when they move over Florida. So that's why we think that it's going to remain a strong hurricane all the way up towards the Space Coast and getting up towards the Jacksonville area. So,
Oscarini Cappuccini, I hope I said that right, says if the hurricane stays on the East Coast, like the model says, what might be the intensity in Lee County? Cat 2, Cat 3, tropical storm?
So if it stays on the East Coast,
as far east, yeah, as the models predict.
As far east as okay, for instance, if you look at this track right here, and you were to say, okay, well, I live in Lee County or I live in the Naples area, what kind of winds can I expect? Well, I think that the winds that you would see, sustained 35, maybe some 40-mile-an-hour winds, some gusts up to 50 from time to time, maybe even some higher gusts, especially the farther east you get, because the closer to where the storm comes inland and tracks is where you're going to see the strongest winds. That's why I said Clewiston, you're likely going to see some winds around hurricane force. I would not be surprised there. Now, you're going to see Category 4 winds. The hurricane force winds only extend outward about 50 miles from the center now. Now, that doesn't mean that the wind field won't expand even more as it gets towards, so that's another factor we're going to be looking at. How much wider is the wind field going to get once it makes its way through the state of Florida? Because now, as it stands, yeah, we'd see tropical storm force winds here, but not hurricane force winds.
So 15 seconds, we're going to be back on TV, and this is our last block. So we'll be wrapping up for those of you who are joining us on air on Fox 4. And of course, we're still live here as I'm getting a spam call on my cell phone right now. Let me decline
what
that.
The heck?
It's awkward.
Welcome back to our special coverage. We are live on Facebook with you right now, and we're getting everything from tell us about which side of the storm is worse to Kurt, who says, let Amy talk, lol. I don't know why he said LOL.
Just saying.
Rowena says, be safe, Southwest Florida. We're praying for you from the Philippines. We appreciate everybody who's part of this conversation. We want to get as many of your questions and concerns addressed just as quickly as we can in our final minutes on here. We're hearing from Tim Bear. They're in inland Collier County, and they want to hear more about, what they might be in for, what they should keep in mind, because they just moved to the Immokalee area within the past month.
Now, I think a place like Immokalee is a really good example of what would happen if we did get a track a little bit further towards the north and west. At least that northwest turn occurs a little bit later. So here's what we're looking at here. As it stands now, Immokalee with this track would see strong tropical storm force winds for a period, especially when the center gets closer to you. So let's say the center went up through western Broward County. You would see potentially winds 50, 60 miles an hour. Now the question, you could get some gusts over hurricane force even as far west as Immokalee.